I'm speaking about a project that we conducted in Berkeley, but mostly with people from the technical university in Ecuador. The team include Freddy Tobar and Ramon Espinel. And the main author of the study was Felipe Silva, and I guided the study. The main issue is, and this is a very, in my view, very important issue, is that the problem of solving the problem of fusarium in banana. Fusarium is a big problem in banana, and it's a disease that threatens about 20 or 30% of the yield. It's started in Australia and in Asia, and it's moving all over the world. And the question is to find a solution for this problem. Now, the banana has really one variety that is the most dominating global variety, and it's a major food, and it's a staple food for Uganda and other countries. So finding a solution would be great. Now, the team that the initiative to start this research came from Ramon Espinel, who was the Secretary of Agriculture of Ecuador. And the idea was that it would be a combination of Berkeley IGI and ESPOL, the Technical University of Ecuador. And the idea was to find new clones of banana that will be able to deal with this virus. Now, this collaboration, maybe I'll tell you about the IDI. The IDI was established by Jennifer Doudna and the woman that discovered CRISPR. And it has its own building, and it got donations from Gordon Moore and several other individuals. And the IDI tried to avoid getting resources from companies, and mostly get the resources from non-profit. The principle in the IDI is that everything that is done has to be co-paid. That IDI will match or even double match money from other sources. Anyhow, so I think all this background is important. So when we started the money, Ecuador offered to pay the growers in Ecuador, and the president offered to pay a large amount of money. I had a correspondence with the president of Ecuador. Many of the dignitaries in the country came to Berkeley. We spoke about establishing a CRISPR center in Ecuador. But then, if you remember, about a year ago, there was some sort of political, not revolution, but some sort of a political upheaval. And the president lost a lot of his power. And in the meantime, this project is in jeopardy. Of course, the pandemic didn't help, and other global development didn't help. But in the meantime, what we did, we developed a model to estimate the impact of the product, who will benefit, who will lose. I think that the paper is important both in terms of methodology as well as in terms of implication. Now, Okay, so generally speaking, this is a paper that I presented to the governor of FAO, and that was one of the first paper, as the first papers that dealt with the economic impact of CRISPR. Now, so obviously all of us know that the diseases are quite an important problem throughout the world, and and CRISPR can be a major solution to a lot of crop diseases. Now, the problem that we are speaking about, the problem in banana, Fusarium, there are several studies that assess its impact. The first study assessed that it will be that the loss from Fusarium would be 116. Will be about 20% of bananas. Banana is about 160 billion. That's the number dollars. That's the number in 2016, and they expected that the loss that the Fusarium would eliminate banana on about 18 to 20% of the acreage. Now, most of the banana in the world is a variety called Cavendish, and it started in Western Asia and Australia, and it is threatening Latin America as well as Africa. Now, actually, it's really interesting. I presented this paper to about, I don't know, 40 or 50 ministers of agriculture in FAO, and the question is, why do we care? We have other crops. And the interesting thing about it is that when it comes to banana, we have several countries in Africa that is the main staple crop, and it's a main source of income for countries like Ecuador, and it's important for countries like Colombia, and it's a source of high quality nutrition throughout the world. It supports a lot of farmers. So I think it's a major issue that deserves some support. Now, there are a lot of literature on the economic effect of disease, but when it comes to banana and Fusarium, there are several studies, and the first study was about favor, and they looked at the diffusion of the disease that probably will that can destroy Cavendish, and what they try to do is to assess what happens if you delay, if you introduce a disease control in a delay manner. They assume that in their case that it would take 12 years to develop the variety, and another 15 years for adoption. So we speak about 30 years, and the benefit will be quite big, $268 million. There are another study that again have some pessimistic prediction about effectiveness, and the benefit are about the benefits are much smaller. Now, the biggest now the biggest advantage of CRISPR is that CRISPR can be developed much faster. And actually, while we are speaking, people in Australia already developed a first CRISPR variety to deal with this problem. Now, generally speaking, we assume that it will take about 5 to 6 years to develop the variety, and the big issue is to develop is to look at the regulation. We will have this new variety. It will take a certain number of years to develop it, and then a certain a number of years to regulate it, and then we have a process of diffusion. So we really speak about we really speak about a strategy that has three elements. First, find the solution, then get it approved, then start the diffusion. And now, if we look at the intuition behind the analysis, and a lot of time when I analyze any problem, I try to very superficially to figure the order of magnitude. So today we spend $115 billion on banana, maybe 120. The consumer surplus is about $200 million because the benefit to consumer is much bigger than the cost because the demand is inelastic. Now, if we lose 15% of the output, it's about 45 and then combining consumer and producer surplus, we speak about $45 billion. The impacts vary among countries. So altogether, the annual loss is at around $45–50 billion from loss of 15% of supply. This is very, very important because it tells you what is the benchmark. And then now we have to develop the model themselves. So what we would like to do is to assess the discounted impact over 40 years globally. And the model operates in the following way. First, we assume that the disease is spreading. So we have a process of spread of the disease, that's one thing. Then we have another process, it is the spread of the development of a solution, the approval of the solution, and then the diffusion of the solution. Is it clear? I think this is very, very important, and I think this is a very important methodological contribution, that we really separate 4 steps. First, the spread of the disease, then finding the solution, then approval, and then diffusion. Now, what we find that if there are no solution, the total discounted loss is about $240 billion. But the impact of producers will vary. Some producers from countries that the disease will be introduced very, very late actually may gain from the disease because the price of banana will go up. Other producers may lose a lot. Now, the other thing is that the value of the solution may be much smaller if the adoption is limited and if the approval is very late. So to me, the main contribution is to show how the value of the solution depend on approval and depend on diffusion, as well as the methodology. So we started with a S-shaped diffusion curve, and we were able to get parameters from a lot of studies about about the parameter of a diffusion curve. So generally, when you start both a disease as well as a solution, in the beginning we have a relatively low rate of diffusion, small number of people adopt the new technology, but over time the number of adopters increase, and it has a S-shape. And this is true with respect both to the disease and the solution. And so the spread of the disease varied among countries. So we try to look at the cost of the disease as well as gain from the technology over time across countries. So we need data about what happened in each country. Now, so one of the things that, as I said before, that we find is that producers in countries that are not affected will gain, will actually gain because the price of the disease will go, the price of banana will go up. Regions that are mildly affected, that where the disease will arrive later on, may not lose that much, but regions that the disease will arrive earlier when you have a lot of producers there will affect very significantly, and that is very important to remember. Now, there is another scenario that when the solution is available, once the solution is available, once the new varieties is available, once the variety is new available, you expect the prices to go down and the cost of the disease to go down. So technically, what do we do? We look at the effect of the disease spread and the effect of adoption in the world over 30 regions. And this region includes many countries, US, European Union, and then you have to take into account that the US and the EU are the biggest importers of banana. They're not very they are not big growers. The other thing that we did, we recognize that there is a market and trade in bananas, which makes it much more complex. Previous model assumed that the market, that every country there is no trade. And we use data from FAO, and we use data from people from Ecuador that did much of the analysis about it. Now let's look at the results. So as I said before, we have 30 regions, and we have divided the regions to four categories: a region with low disease risk, a region with moderate disease risk, high disease risk, and very high disease risk. So what I mean by low and high, so the countries vary according to the problem. Will it happen? Now, as I said before, countries that are not affected, they consume 28% of the production. Countries with low disease risk have 38% of the production. Countries with moderate and high disease risk have low consumption but high production. So if you really look at it, low disease risk has about 50% of the production, and very high and high disease risk have about 30% of the production. So 30% of the production is very vulnerable, and generally these are in countries that are not big consumers of bananas. So we have 5 scenarios. One scenario is no solution. Another scenario is that we have silver bullet, 100% starting in 2022, and adoption will last 15 years. So adoption, we assume that adoption lasts 15 years. Then we have late adoption that is identical to the first scenario, but we have 10 years delay because of innovation challenges as well as regulation challenges. Then you have late modest adoption that where you have it's similar to scenario 2, but adoption rate is 40%. And then we have what we call stable adoption, where basically we assume that that countries in Europe and the US, especially countries in Europe, do not adopt the technology because they oppose CRISPR, and there is a delay of 12 years. Now, this is a scenario that is studied by Staver assumed. And I think that what we can see in the results is very important. First, we look at the impact on consumers. Now, so now we can really, so if you look at the table, we have 5 scenarios, and we have basically 5 set of countries. Countries with no disease, low, moderate, high, and very high. If we look at the impact on consumers, the impact on consumers, the impact of consumers in the worst scenario is $66 billion in importing countries, that's Europe and the EU, $90 billion in countries that have low risk of disease, and then you can see it in the rest. We have the confidence interval. You can see that the impact is quite big. Now, if you have silver bullet, this is the second category. I don't know if I can. The second category, you can see that the cost of the disease goes down in countries with no disease from 66 billion to 8 billion. And altogether, the cost of the disease go down from about $280 billion to something much, much smaller, about $25 billion. If you have late adoption, the cost of the disease goes is still significant. If you have a modest late adoption, now, but if you go to staggered adoption, namely that the EU doesn't allow it, and the solution introduced very late because of slow regulation, you can really see that the overall impact is very small, $30 billion. So to some extent, what you really see that the key point is the regulation. The key point is how fast you introduce a solution. If you introduce a solution very fast, then it's a no-brainer. The gain from the technology is huge. If you introduce this very late, no one gets from it. Now we have this thing about impact on a producer surplus. Now what you can see that actually producer surplus in countries that have that don't have the disease, it is the first column. You can see that countries that don't have the disease, producer actually gain. Countries with no disease and low level of disease gain from the disease because the price of banana goes up. But if you look at the countries that have a high rate of disease, the loss is huge. So overall, producer may lose $495 billion, but you can really see that small, it will be, but you can see big difference between growers, between countries with low vulnerability and high vulnerability. Now, again, what you can see is that if you have a solution, the impact that is immediate, the impact is very slow, but if you have what we call a stable solution, namely that the disease is introduced, the solution is introduced very slow and Europe doesn't buy it, the CRISPR doesn't make a difference. So what we have here, we look at the global impact. And this is a number at the bottom here that are really important. The overall social loss from the disease, if there is no intervention, is $500 billion. But if there is intervention, there is a silver bullet, the loss goes to $71 billion. So basically gain $430 billion from an immediate solution. If you have a slow solution, you gain $250 billion. But if you have a slow adoption and a European resistance, the gain will be maybe $40 billion. So you'll have 10% gain from the disease. So to some extent, if you have slow adoption of the disease and slow regulation and boycott of CRISPR, the total gain from the disease, you lose 90% of the benefit of the solution. So I think that to me is one key point, is that to some extent, the rate of approval and the speed of approval and acceptance of CRISPR really matter. So the interpretation is that impact doesn't vary among countries. Impact depends on the rate of regulation. Now, producers in some of the countries don't really care because they will benefit from it. If you don't expect the disease to affect you, you will benefit from it. On the other, producers in other countries will suffer a lot. So you cannot expect that all the producers will work together to find a solution. And for me, that is a very important point. That's the reason why you need a global cooperation, because since countries don't gain the same amount for the solution, some of them basically wouldn't take a problem as seriously as others, and the net effect of the solution wouldn't be introduced or adopted. Now, as I said before, the gain really vary by countries and by regions, and we try to look what happened over time. That generally, there are some countries that actually gain if you gain in producer surplus and overall welfare if you don't have the solution. But on the other hand, there are some countries that lose both in terms of consumer surplus and terms of producer surplus if you don't have a solution, and the impact depends on the scenario. The more severe the scenario is, the less you allow to use the technology, and the bigger is the debate, the global loss is much, much bigger. So if I start to summarize it, I think that the importance of our model is that we provide order of magnitude to consumer and producer surplus from delaying or for not allowing the solution to a disease. Now, this is a CRISPR solution. It is practical. The CRISPR solution actually is available, but the impact of the global impact depend on when it will be introduced, both in terms of regulation and in terms of the future. Some countries will benefit from it. That's something that is really amazing. Other countries will lose immensely. This type of differences really suggests that it's very difficult to have a uniform perspectives. There is a big impact on consumers and consumer surplus in Europe, especially if there is a lot of delay, but they may not be unified. And generally, consumers wouldn't fight very much for a solution to this problem. So you expect the producer to try to reach a solution. But again, as we can see, the impact on producers varies across countries. So I think the net effect of what this study suggests from a policy that the gene-edited varieties may face several blocks. First, European resistance may reduce the introduction and the overall welfare to be 10% of the potential welfare. Secondly, countries have different type of impact. Thirdly, the regulation can really can drastically affect when and how things will happen. So altogether, from our perspective, unless you have some sort of uniform effort and you don't, and you have some contribution from FAO, UN, or donor to start the process won't start. So altogether, I think this paper tell you that when it comes to CRISPR, key elements are regulation, delays. In many cases, the technology can be introduced in 5 years, 10 years. CRISPR is very fast, and but when you don't have money for research, you don't have a goodwill when it comes to regulation, you have a lot of uncertainty. You may have a situation that a solution that can save you $500 billion may save you at the end maybe $50 billion, if that, and that suddenly donors and everyone else may be resistant to introduce the solution. So that is a basic, that is a message. What I suggest is to end the session that was my presentation, and I wish my partners were there because they will tell you exactly what's going on in the countries. The paper is available in the new journal of Association of Agricultural and Applied Economists, and I hope that it will develop a line of research that would assess the impact of new regulation across countries over time under different scenarios. Any questions? Yes. So, okay. Oh. Oh, okay. 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 In my view, my interpretation of the bioeconomy is very, very simple. My interpretation of the bioeconomy is the use of modern biological knowledge or any biological knowledge with biological resources to solve agriculture and any other problems. So the bioeconomy for me includes agriculture, biofuel, green chemistry, whatever. So to me, CRISPR is part of the bioeconomy. The point is this: without modern CRISPR and the knowledge associated with CRISPR, you won't have a solution for the pandemic. I think that a lot of plant diseases, you can look at them as health problems. People will die without bananas. So my feeling is if you can use biotechnologies and knowledge to deal with diseases like COVID, there is no reason not to use it with other diseases. So my general definition of the bioeconomy, of course, includes CRISPR. Now, people in different countries may not like it. People in Europe may consider the bioeconomy only organic agriculture. That is their right. But I don't think that the general definition of the bioeconomy. In the US, the bioeconomy may be only GMO. Again, that's their right. There is a big difference between the definition by a scientist or that basically the conceptual definition that have no constraint and a political definition. So in my view, CRISPR is part of the bioeconomy as a general concept. You don't like CRISPR, in your country, don't have it. Now, as an economist, I say, how much would you pay for not having CRISPR? In this case, you pay 90% of, without CRISPR, you will have a very costly disease. You may have another solution that may be introduced later, but I think what this technique does, it can tell you how different definitions of the bioeconomy can affect the consumer and producer and social welfare.
May I have a follow-up question? So why should the government care about these bananas? You mentioned, okay, that people need these bananas to survive. I could argue, I'm just playing the devil's advocate. I could say, okay, well, why should they produce bananas? Let them produce something else. Why should the government care? Government have other things they have to care about, education, etc. Why the bananas?
That's a perfect question. Now, in the case of CRISPR, and this is, and we need more analysis, but even when we look at the consumer surplus and we have a very detailed analysis of impact on consumer surplus, a lot of the people that are losing from it are poor people in developing countries. So the role of the government here is not to finance the research. The role of the government is not to finance the change. The role of the government is to provide some initial support for the research to start. And the reason is that we have basically a situation that consumers don't have enough political power to organize together and support it. And producers are fighting among themselves because some producers gain and some producers lose. And in the meantime, you have a solution that affect consumer negatively in large scale. So I think the main reason that the government should interfere is to deal with the situation that the political economic situation that some of the beneficiary of the solution, namely consumer, don't have the capacity to organize and to get involved. Altogether, I don't think to speak about big sum of money. Altogether, that is the biggest case for ag research globally. The fact that consumers are the main beneficiary of ag research, they don't really have a uniform force to interfere, and the FAO and other organizations basically are developed in order to improve the well-being mostly of consumer by triggering, providing public good, including knowledge that will support the problem. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, David, for a very interesting paper. And maybe a little bit following up on Justus' last observation. One of the things that did happen with the banana market some years ago is that there was this shift from the multinationals, from Dole, Chiquita, Fifes, from being producers and marketers to being marketers. They are intermediaries. They're manipulating the value chain, and they shifted to independent producers in all of the countries that I'm aware of: Costa Rica, Ecuador, Honduras, Panama, a couple of other countries that produce bananas for exports, right? So I think that there's been, it is in the best interest in some cases of the government, because we're talking about national producers, tons of people being employed in those, and as a source of foreign exchange for those countries, right? And that's a little bit going towards that, answering that question that Justus raised. From my standpoint, and I come from Honduras, right? We've had these issues with hurricanes and so on, but we're one of the largest banana producers in the world. 40% of our exports went to the European Union, and particularly Germany. And so my industry was, my banana industry, my country was particularly sensitive to consumer preferences in Germany. Guess what happens when there was the opportunity to come up with a GM, a conventional transgenic black sigatoka resistant banana? Company said, no, we're not going there because Germany will not buy our bananas. I think that's, so I think in one of the alternative scenarios, it might be a little bit of the Staber scenario you mentioned, that maybe we want to explore that further just to kind of figure out what happens if some countries are not adapting because of these as a reaction to regulations, and assuming that European Union eventually, some of the CRISPR are actually moved towards that scenario where they do not adopt regardless of, or they put some onerous kind of requirements to actually import. So that might be one scenario. And then the other thing is treating East Africa might be a little bit, it is a separate market in a sense, because you're talking about East Highland bananas, they're completely different market. They do have some dessert bananas, but it's not a big part of the market. So yeah, I think that there's quite a bit of things that can be done. And I particularly enjoyed your comment about doing more on the regulatory issues, regulatory delays and impacts of regulation on those estimates of benefits.
Good.
Yeah.
Now, actually, I really like your argument. I used a lot of this argument to speak with the people with FAO. Obviously, but really, it's really interesting because we have 50 agricultural secretaries, and they gave me about 7, I don't know, 10 minutes, and then they spoke half an hour, and it's clear that different countries have really different perspectives. So Colombia and Ecuador, they basically, even though they wouldn't be big losers from the business, they really want to make sure that the industry is solid because they took over production in the country, and they really want now they also would like to see something like CRISPR working because they would like eventually to have research that would allow you to have multiple varieties of bananas that will grow all over. Other countries, say, look, we don't have enough money, we don't have big growers. So countries with big growers wanted this to happen. Countries with small growers said, we wouldn't contribute anything, but we would like that the FAO will do it. African countries were very much for this thing because they worried that this disease will move to other varieties. So to some extent, I really think that the only argument that really pays the day is the argument of consumer, because the reality was that the people that approached Berkeley were a producer in Ecuador. And what really happened to Ecuador is that there was a lot of problem with the president, and then suddenly there was a war in Ukraine. And what happened with the war in Ukraine is Ecuador export mostly to Russia. So they lost a big export market, and all the perspective and attention on banana changed. So basically, I agree. I think you made a great analysis, but there is an interesting difference between what you can do as an economist in terms of general model and what you can do as a practicing economist to look at the regulation and speak with the minister. So that's the point. Any other question?
I think it's passed. I was going to give a slightly different answer or different perspective on the devil's advocate question, which is there's the productivity of bananas on fertile tropical land is incredible with, I think 50 tons per hectare being possible, sort of maybe 5 times more than maize on good land. So the export significance of dessert bananas can be is enormous. But having grown bananas for myself in Miami for many years, we all, those of us from the global north overlook their potential by limiting ourselves to Cavendish. Everything else is so much better. But as a food security issue in East Africa, where poor hygiene and banana production in places like Malawi is a problem, tools to increase the productivity for people farming on less than a hectare are critical. And that should be an effective argument against why should we do this? Because it feeds families on less than a hectare in East Africa.
Okay.
And those varieties are very successful.
Okay, now, so, okay, I tell you, again, this is part of all this policy debate that we were involved in. Now, the vision that the CRISPR people have in Berkeley or in other places is that it would be it would be possible and actually easy to develop new type of varieties of banana. The same group of people that invented CRISPR developed, for example, new seeds of mint. That's to do with banana. But they were able to show that you can develop seeds for a crop that you basically now use by cloning. So to some extent, what they would really like to do is to develop an agenda that you can really develop a diverse set of bananas, mostly to developing countries, and they approach AID and other organizations. And they also do it as an intellectual exercise. So they get money from donors, and one of the big things is to develop varieties for poor people. At the same time, when you go to FAO and you meet with the ministers, you basically have to look at things that they will agree. So I spoke about all these points, problem of Cavendish, but would they really, the countries that were involved as countries that are the exporting countries that worry about bananas, and basically I represented the consumers in a way that the minister will buy. So a lot of time when you present a narrative, you need to know with your clientele. I agree with you completely, and I think that to me, as economists, our big challenge, why I fight for CRISPR, because with CRISPR, and I think even with GMO, you can have a totally different set of crops that will be more diversified, and you can introduce it to developing countries. See what happened to BT cotton in India. But the fact that Europe frightens everyone about GM, and a lot in America and the US is not doing very much. So basically, Latin America is really the only fighters for modern plant breeding, and that's the reason that we have the conference here. Okay, Sam.